If you have seen headlines claiming that 80% of US radars just went blind, stop right there, because that is not what the credible public record shows. The real story is still dramatic, but it is different, and in some ways even more important. What the available reporting supports is that this war has become a battle over sensors, air defenses, targeting networks, and information itself. Israeli assessments cited by Bloomberg said that up to 80% of Iran's air defenses had been destroyed. AP, meanwhile, reported satellite evidence of damage to radomes and facilities linked to the U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. Those are serious developments, but they do not add up to proof that 80% of America's radar network suddenly went dark. So today, we are going to strip away the hype and look at what was actually hit, why radar matters so much in this war, and why the sensor battle may end up shaping the next phase of the conflict more than any viral headline ever could. To understand why this matters, you have to start with what radar really is in a modern war. Radar is not just a spinning dish or a dome on a base. It is the backbone of early warning, air defense, missile tracking, interception timing, and command decisions. If missiles are the fists of modern war, radar is often the eyesight. The side that sees first can usually react first. The side that loses visibility starts making slower, riskier, and more expensive decisions. That is why the most important phrase in this story is not blackout. It is sensor war. CENTCOM said U.S. strikes targeted Iranian command and control facilities, air defense capabilities, missile and drone launch sites, and military airfields. That tells you immediately that the mission was not just about blowing things up. It was about taking away Iran's ability to see, coordinate, track, and defend. Now here is the first big correction to the viral narrative. The widely repeated 80% figure does exist in the information space, but it refers to Iran's air defenses, not to U.S. radars. Bloomberg reported, and ISW later summarized, that Israeli assessments said up to 80% of Iran's air defenses had been destroyed. The Times of Israel separately quoted IDF chief Ayal Zamir, saying Israel had destroyed about 80% of Iran's air defense systems and achieved near complete air superiority over Iranian skies. That is a huge claim, and even with the usual wartime caution, it points to the real center of gravity in this campaign, blinding Iran's defensive network so aircraft and missiles can operate more freely. In other words, the 80% story is real, but it is pointing in almost the exact opposite direction from the title you brought me. That does not mean U.S. or allied facilities escaped damage. Far from it. AP reported today that satellite imagery appears to show heavy damage across multiple sites in the region. This includes destruction at the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, where a large building and radomes were reportedly damaged. AP also described damage in Abu Dhabi and fires tied to attacks in Dubai and Oman. So there's real evidence that Iranian retaliation has hit parts of the regional military and logistics architecture that supports U.S. operations. But that is still different from saying the United States lost most of its radar picture. Damage to some radomes or facilities in the Gulf may degrade specific nodes, local coverage, or regional response time. However, the public evidence you provided does not establish an 80% nationwide or theater-wide U.S. radar collapse. That leap is exactly where sensational storytelling outruns the facts. And this is where the story gets more strategically interesting. A war does not need to destroy every radar to create uncertainty. It only needs to damage enough of the right nodes at the right times to force the other side into caution. If a sensor is gone, if a radar dome is damaged, if data links are interrupted, if operators have to confirm tracks from secondary systems instead of primary ones, then the result may not look like a Hollywood-style blackout. It may look like delays, degraded confidence, shorter warning windows, extra scrambling, or a greater need to disperse assets. That kind of degradation can be extremely important, especially in a conflict stretching from Iranian airspace to Gulf bases to maritime choke points like the Strait of Hormuz. So the accurate framing is not, America went blind. It is, parts of the regional sensor architecture may be under pressure while U.S. and Israeli strikes are trying much harder to blind Iran. There is another layer here, and it is the maritime one. The AP has repeatedly emphasized that the Strait of Hormuz remains one of the world's most important choke points, carrying about 1/5 of global oil traffic. During this conflict, President Trump has publicly urged other countries to send warships to help secure or reopen Hormuz. Regional attacks have already disrupted energy flows, shipping confidence, and air travel. In that environment, radar is not only about fighter jets and missile batteries. It is also about monitoring sea lanes, detecting drone threats, protecting ports, and keeping shipping lanes open. If Allied radars near the Gulf take hits, even localized hits, the implications can spread far beyond the military sphere. It hits insurance markets, oil pricing, and commercial transport. That is why any verified damage to sensor sites matters, even when the viral 80% blind claim does not hold up. And yet, at the same time, the evidence shows the US and Israel are still shaping the tempo of the sensor war. CENTCOM's releases and imagery have consistently highlighted strikes on Iranian missile and drone infrastructure as well as air defense systems. AP's reporting on Karg Island said U.S. strikes destroyed military targets, including air defenses and radar systems there, while leaving core oil infrastructure intact. That is a very revealing detail. It suggests a pattern. Target the military eyes and shields, preserve leverage over economic assets, and widen the freedom of action for follow-on strikes. If that pattern is correct, then radar and air defense suppression are not side notes in this conflict. They are central to the whole operational design. That is also why you should be careful with the word blackout. There's a real blackout story in this war, but it is mostly about Iran's internet, not America's radar. Multiple reports describe Iran imposing or intensifying an internet blackout after the February 28th strikes. Cybersecurity reporting and public summaries described connectivity dropping to about 4% and later even lower. That means a large part of what the outside world is seeing from Iran is being filtered through military releases, satellite analysis, state media, exile networks, and social media fragments. In simple terms, Iran has been far more digitally blacked out than the United States has been radarly blacked out. And when those two very different stories get blurred together, viewers end up with a false picture. Now let's talk about why false pictures spread so fast in this war. The New York Times reported that a cascade of AI-generated fakes about the Iran conflict caused widespread chaos online. Other reporting described more than 100 unique AI-generated war posts circulating in just a short period. The Guardian has also reported on how AI slop and false debunks are distorting the public's ability to verify real atrocities and real damage. That matters here because once a dramatic claim enters the feed, it can travel faster than any careful correction. Claims like 80% of U.S. radars blind, carrier sunk, city erased, leader killed are examples of this. So part of being YouTube safe and factually strong in 2026 is not only avoiding false claims yourself. It is actively understanding that the information environment is now one of the battlefields. And in a conflict like this, misinformation is not just noise. It changes how audiences interpret real events. For example, AP's satellite analysis of regional damage is serious and relevant. Damage to radomes at a major U.S. naval headquarters is meaningful. But when that gets mixed with unsupported claims saying entire U.S. missile defense networks were blinded, the public stops being able to distinguish between confirmed damage and total collapse. That confusion is dangerous because it rewards the most extreme version of every story. The credible picture is often less theatrical and more consequential. It's not instant catastrophe, but mounting friction across multiple nodes of a regional war machine. There's also a reason both sides care so much about the radar narrative. If Israel and the United States can convince the world that Iranian air defenses are largely broken, they project momentum, control, and air superiority. If Iran can convince the world that U.S. and allied radar networks are faltering, it can project resilience and deterrence. Each side wants the public to believe the other side is losing its eyes. That is why radar claims should always be treated carefully. The truth may not be as simple as one side seeing everything and the other seeing nothing. In many wars, the more realistic state is asymmetry. One side has broader, better, and more resilient sensor coverage, while the other side still retains enough capability to create danger, uncertainty, and selective surprise that appears to be closer to what we are seeing here. Another piece people miss is that radar is not one giant switch. The U.S. and its partners rely on layered systems: shipborne radars, airborne platforms, land-based missile defense radars, fighter sensors, and allied networks. Losing one node hurts, losing several hurts more. But it is very different from losing 80% of U.S. radars in a literal sense. That phrasing sounds as if continental America or the entire U.S. military suddenly went blind. None of the credible sources supports that. What they do support is that the regional threat environment is serious enough that damage to key Gulf sites has turned the sensor layer into one of the main contested spaces. That is a big story on its own. It does not need exaggeration to be compelling. And this has real consequences for what comes next. If Iranian air defenses have in fact been heavily degraded, then U.S. and Israeli forces have more freedom to strike targets. Bloomberg's reporting suggested that despite the destruction of much of Iran's air defense umbrella, hard-to-find launchers still complicate operations. That is a crucial nuance. Even if the defender loses much of its radar-based shield, it can still remain dangerous through mobility and concealment. This is why the war has not simply ended with air superiority. Seeing better is not the same thing as solving every operational problem. It just shifts which problems dominate the next phase. That next phase may be especially important in the Gulf. AP said the U.S. claims to have damaged or sunk more than 100 Iranian vessels. Retaliation has hit sites in Bahrain, the UAE, and beyond. Shipping remains tense, and Washington is still trying to broaden support for maritime security around Hormuz. In that setting, radar matters as much at sea as it does over land. Warships need detection windows. Missile defense crews need tracking confidence. Civilian shipping needs reassurance that someone is watching the lanes. So if you're looking for the real reason the radar war matters, this is it. Whoever can maintain the stronger sensor picture in and around the Gulf gets a major advantage in both military pressure and economic leverage. Let's also address the domestic U.S. angle, because the headline implies a direct homeland emergency. None of the official or major wire reporting shows a nationwide U.S. radar crisis. The claims in circulation are about the Middle East theater and Gulf-based systems. That distinction is critical for accuracy and for YouTube safety. If you tell viewers that most U.S. radars just went blind, many will interpret that as a threat to American airspace broadly. The evidence does not support that interpretation. What it supports is a much narrower, though still highly consequential, reality. Regional U.S. and allied installations may have suffered sensor damage while the U.S.-Israeli campaign stripped Iran of its own radar capacity. So what is the strongest truthful takeaway? It is this. The war has entered a phase where visibility itself is becoming a target. The U.S. and Israel are trying to blind Iran's air defenses to preserve air superiority and strike freedom. Iran is trying to prove it can still hit the nodes that help Washington monitor the Gulf. AP's reporting shows some of those nodes have taken visible damage. But the viral claim that 80% of U.S. radars went blind is not confirmed by credible reporting. The accurate version is subtler and stronger. Iran did not blind America, but it may have damaged parts of the regional sensor web. This happened at the same time the U.S. and Israel were aggressively trying to blind Iran. That is the real contest. And if you are trying to build the highest retention version of this story, that is actually better than the fake version, because it gives you a real mystery to explore. Not, did America suddenly go dark? But whose eyes are actually failing first in this war? That question lets you take viewers through the air defense campaign, the AP satellite findings, and the maritime stakes in Hormuz. It also explores the way AI misinformation is muddying every piece of evidence that surfaces online. It creates tension without breaking trust. It sounds serious because it is serious. And most importantly, it survives fact-checking. In the end, the biggest lesson here is not about a single percentage. It is about how modern wars are fought and narrated at the same time. Radar domes, command links, air defense batteries, internet blackouts, satellite imagery, AI fakes, and viral clips all now sit inside one giant feedback loop. The side that can degrade the other's vision while keeping its own narrative believable gains a double advantage. That is why the phrase radar war fits this moment better than blackout. A blackout implies one side suddenly loses everything. A radar war implies a dynamic struggle over who gets to see, react, target, and shape the story first. Based on the evidence available today, that is the truest version of what is happening.